Story time at Jay the Storyteller. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness creates a wave that changes countless lives, even the ones you'll never meet. This is the story of a man who did something simple, something anyone could do, but what followed changed lives in ways no one could have imagined. It was a chilly morning in the city of Nairobi. The streets were alive, matatus honking, vendors shouting, people rushing to work. Among the sea of faces was David, a young man in his early 30s, dressed neatly but worn down by life. He had lost his job 2 months ago. Every day, he walked the same route, hoping for interviews that never came. On this morning, he had just 200 shillings left in his pocket. Enough for one more day's meal, maybe two. As he walked toward a cafe, he noticed a woman by the roadside, her car broken down. Others passed without a glance, but David stopped. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked. She sighed. "Flat tire. I don't have the tools." David looked at his hands, then at her car. He wasn't a mechanic, but he'd learned enough from his father to help. He spent half an hour fixing it, clothes dirty, hands scraped, but he did it. The woman, surprised and grateful, offered him money. He smiled and shook his head. "No, ma'am. I just did what anyone should do." She insisted, but he refused. "Just help someone else if you get the chance," he said. She smiled, not knowing that sentence would change many lives. The woman, Grace, drove away feeling something stir inside her, a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She was a businesswoman, always focused on profits, meetings, and deadlines. That day, something shifted. Later that afternoon, she stopped by a small roadside cafe for tea. Inside, a waiter looked stressed. The place was almost empty. Grace ordered tea and some snacks. When the waiter served her, Grace noticed he was trembling slightly. "You okay?" she asked. He smiled weakly. "Just a long day, ma'am. My mother is sick, and I'm trying to raise money for her medicine." Grace paused, remembering David's words. "Help someone else if you get the chance." Without thinking twice, she handed him a small envelope with 10,000 shillings inside. The waiter froze. "Ma'am, I can't accept this." Grace smiled gently. "It's not charity. It's kindness. Someone reminded me to pass it on. So I am." The waiter's name was Kelvin. That money meant more than he could ever explain. He bought his mother's medicine and still had enough to pay for food and electricity. A week later, Kelvin's mother recovered. As soon as she was able to walk again, Kelvin told her what happened. Tears filled her eyes. "My son, we may not have much, but we can still give." They decided to cook a large pot of food and feed the street kids who slept near the bus station. That evening, a group of hungry children sat together eating warm ugali and stew, laughing for the first time in days. Among them was a small boy named Amos, 11 years old, quiet, with eyes older than his age. Amos lived alone. His parents had died in an accident years ago, and he survived by cleaning cars and collecting bottles. That night, as he ate the warm food, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Kelvin spoke to him kindly, asking where he slept. When Amos told him, Kelvin promised, "Tomorrow, I'll talk to someone who can help you." The next day, Kelvin visited a local children's shelter he'd once volunteered at. He introduced Amos to the caretaker, and soon, the boy was taken in. Over time, Amos flourished. He went to school, learned fast, and grew into a bright young man. Years later, he won a scholarship abroad to study medicine. Fast forward 15 years. Dr. Amos now worked at a hospital overseas. One morning, an older woman was rushed in after a stroke. She was visiting from Kenya. Her name, Grace. Amos recognized her instantly. She didn't remember him, of course. How could she? But as he cared for her, he remembered that night, that meal, that one act of kindness that had given him a second chance at life. When Grace finally recovered, she thanked him with tears in her eyes. "You're an angel," she whispered. He smiled and said softly, "No, ma'am. I'm just passing it on." When Amos returned to Kenya years later, he searched for Kelvin. the waiter who had helped him. He found him running a small restaurant that provided free meals to the homeless every Sunday. And one evening, as they shared a meal, Amos told him everything. Kelvin was speechless. All that, just because one man stopped to help a stranger with her car? Amos nodded. Yes, it all started with one act of kindness. They decided to honor that unknown man by creating a foundation to help struggling youth, the Chain of Kindness Project. Months later, they found out who that man was. David, the jobless man who'd fixed Grace's car. They reached out and invited him to the launch event. When he arrived, he was shocked, people cheering, cameras flashing. David looked confused. Kelvin stepped forward. "You started this," he said. David smiled, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't do much," he whispered. Amos smiled back. "You did enough." Kindness doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be done. Because you never know who's watching, who's learning, or who's healing because of it. So wherever you are, be kind and pass it on, subscribe and like the video. Jai the storyteller.